Now, let's move into today's discussion, and the topic for today is primarily for recruiting providers in the UK who are interested or curious about offering RPO solutions. Now, the UK is one of, if not the most competitive recruitment markets in the world. So how do UK recruitment agencies approach setting up an RPO business? Where do you start? Well, we are in for a real treat because we have teamed up with a couple of experts who are now using their extensive RPO knowledge to support recruitment agency leaders in building sustainable recurring revenue through deployment of talent solutions. So I want to welcome my guests, Paul and Miles. I'm excited about the conversation, but before we dive into the discussion, I'd like to ask you to introduce yourselves quickly, starting with Paul, in maybe 60 seconds. Tell us about yourself and how you both started Northstar People.
Gosh, normally you do age before beauty, but this time you've done beauty before age. But anyway, I'll crack on and introduce myself. So Paul Sharpe, been in recruitment industry for over 25 years. Started life working for a deco, so that's where I learnt, I guess, the trade and learnt all about recruitment. Stayed at a deco for quite a long time. I've worked in house doing the recruitment for BAE Systems, which is a brilliant experience, by the way, going in house. And then went back to a deco. I loved it so much. Ended up working in the IT, digital, and data space for over 8 years as COO and running a team of 200 people, building out a talent solutions business, and then set it up in business with Miles. I've always worked in that corporate talent solution space, so this has always been a massive passion of mine. And Miles and I, we've known each other for a number of years, gosh, probably about 10, 15 years. And we met one night in Manchester in November. It was dark, it was miserable, it was cold, it was raining. We were both a little bit fed up, if I'm going to be honest with you, of the recruitment industry. And we thought we'd meet up for a beer, put the world to rights. And from that conversation, we had the spark and I guess the idea of doing some work together. Took us a little bit of time to formulate that idea, and equally we just wanted to make sure it was right for both parties. And yeah, from that night over a beer in Manchester, Northstar was born.
Miles.
Cool. I'll keep it fairly brief. I'm a salesperson at heart. My background is solution sales. Started off in financial services, then IT. And then, like many people, got sold into the recruitment industry by a recruiter. Before I knew I was doing IT contract recruitment. But, went on a bit of a quick journey and was very fortunate. 3 years into my journey in the recruitment industry, I got very, very, very well trained and coached into how to do talent solution sales, and I was going out selling RPO before it was called RPO, and we had some really big sort of successes there. I've spent most of the last 20 years working as an independent consultant. I'm just very, very passionate about helping organizations and helping the leaders of those recruitment organizations be the best they can possibly be. And I think, certainly, and I'm not going to steal my own thunder for some of the stuff that's to come, but getting into this exciting world of recurring revenue is really where it's at for organizations. And as Paul rightfully said, that was the real catalyst for us to come together. We've realized there was a common mission here to get, the industry, particularly in the UK, that doesn't necessarily have the best of reputations in terms of being seen as a professional service. There's a lot of brilliant recruiters and recruitment businesses in the UK, but there's very little barriers to entry. So there's a little bit of a reputation, issue there with recruiters in the UK. But what we're doing is to really change that mindset and to hopefully get business to see recruitment as a proper professional B2B solution. And that's the mission that brought us together, and that's what we're doing now.
Well, welcome both. I think I heard from both of you big passion for the industry, for recruiting, and a compliment between the professional, the technical and practical experience with TA and RPO and sales experience. So we've got both perspectives covered. Now, today's webinar title, from contingency and RPO, let's start with some definitions before we dive into the how and so forth. Now, most people on this call understand contingency, and for clarification, the adjective contingent can be used to describe something that can occur only when something else happens first. Meaning, in the staffing world, contingency means the business making money is contingent on filling roles, right? And that is a problem because roles can get canceled, they change, they can be put on hold. You can do all the work and not get paid for it. And that is what drives us into RPO. So Paul, I'm going to start with you. Help us understand, what does RPO mean?
So I think the lingo is quite important because it does mean different things to different people. Watching the industry a long time, a lot of people have got a different understanding of what different abbreviations mean. I don't think there's a right and a wrong. Is it a trunk or is it a boot? Is it trash or is it rubbish? Is it a butt or is it bum? Is it a bar? Is it a pub? Is it a cookie or a biscuit? So all these different things, we're all looking at the same thing, but sometimes it just means something slightly different. So I always default back to the staffing industry analyst interpretation, which is RPO for me is about permanent recruitment. P is about contingent recruitment. And obviously within the contingent space, that would be your contractors and your temporary sort of employees. So that in a nutshell is it. Today we're going to be talking about RPO by definition, so more leaning towards the permanent service line of recruitment. But listen, the principles of what Miles and I do and what we're going to be talking about today can equally apply to managed service programs, and specifically when we get into the customer segmentation, that's just best good practice. So whilst there's a lot of stuff in here which we'll include and go through, which is aimed at how do you get to the end of the road being providing talent solutions, a lot of what we do along this journey is just about getting your house in order and making sure that you're doing a really good job for your customers, as Miles talked about. So it's about raising the bar from a service perspective. But yeah, for the purpose of this session, we're going to be talking about RPO in the main, but happy to take any questions, anything that's not permanent recruitment related.
All right. Well, thank you for that clarification, but because I agree with you, I've been in the RPO space for many years, and some people might disagree with you and define it differently. But just for clarity, what we're talking about today is permanent hiring. So we heard some of your passion for RPO when you introduced yourself. And this is one of my favorite questions to ask any RPO, because all of them are passionate about RPO. Why are you passionate about RPO, Paul?
Well, I think because I've been in the industry a long time, I've seen so much and benefited from it and provided certain aspects to customers. So I've got an emotional attachment to RPO and talent solutions. I think if we take a step back just for 1 second, after every tight labour market, RPO has bounced back. It's bounced back quicker and faster than most of the sectors and services. If you look the research that is out there, and some great research comes out of the USA, by the way. People are predicting that the market in 2024 was worth around 9 billion. Everybody's predicting double-digit growth, some a little bit more than others. There is a company called Polaris Research that published a piece of research last year, and they predict that the market's going to go from 9 billion to 32 billion in 8.5 years now. So whichever way you look at it, whether it's the Polaris Research, the research, everybody's saying this is a market that's going to boom. If you look back, after every tight labour market in every geography, talent solutions bounces back quick. And if you think about it, it makes sense, right? Because in a tight labour market, TA teams, the internal TA teams, they've been stripped back to the bone. So HRDs, if you look at HRD research, they're all saying the same thing. They're very, very concerned about the capacity in the TA once hiring starts to increase more than what it has done in 2024. I don't think everybody's predicting 2025 is going to be massively different, but it's only going to have to grow a little bit to put pressure on those TA teams. And in the short time we've been back from the holiday season, Miles and I, we've had a handful of conversations where agencies have actually been approached by organizations saying they're worried about capacity in the TA teams, and they're starting to ask about more talent solutions. So the passion for me is born about the experience of being, I guess, around through every one of these tight labour markets. I think if you also just take a step back as well, I think if you're a recruiter and you haven't come across a situation where one of the big providers has come in and taken your work away, you're very lucky. 6 years ago, I had a big piece of work with a company called Invesco. They're a global company. And one of the very big providers, and was Robert, came in and they pitched to the customer about running all their talent requirements. And before I knew it, they'd signed an agreement and they'd outsource all their recruitment to this third party, this one of the big five providers in the world. I had to give up £500,000 worth of gross margin, which was huge. And it was for one reason. I hadn't been asking the customer what they wanted. I was sat very comfortable on a fairly healthy contract book, lots of perm requirements, but I wasn't being proactive. You only have to go through that once or twice. I've still got the mental scars. It's still like worries me that I didn't do my job properly at that time and cost the company a lot of money. So I'm passionate because about the opportunity, about what history tells us, what everybody's telling us is going to happen going forward in the market. But I'm also passionate because I've been there and I've lost business to some of the providers because I was a game and because I didn't have a plan for that customer. And I'm a bit ashamed by that, if I'm being brutally honest with you.
Well, I have to tell, I've heard comparable stories from other RPOA members as well, specifically in terms of the value of RPO and coming back from a recession. I wasn't part of RPO during the 2008-9 US recession, but it was an opportunity for RPO to grow after that recession, mainly because of the scalability that the RPO solution brings to organizations and employers. So the next question is for Miles, and according to some Northstar survey, we know that 76% of agency owners and leaders are looking at RPO solutions as the future. So help us understand why, Miles.
Blimey. How long have we got? No, there's multiple things we could talk about here. I'm just going to do it through the lens of current UK market, the conversations that we're having. You're right. 08, 09, 10, the recession in this country was pretty horrific as well. And I think, just recently, a lot of recruiters in the UK have felt, things have been pretty tough for the last sort of 12, 18 months, maybe not quite as bad, maybe just not quite as bad as that financial crisis. But do you know what? In some areas, it's been brutal. And I think there's many agency owners who are just sick to death of it and doing this roller coaster and being on this bloody hamster wheel. And they're saying, I can't carry on. We've got to find a different way of doing things. But putting that short-term frustration to one side, look, we talked about customers here. And one thing that's guaranteed is as soon as we win a customer, we're going to lose a customer. Okay, they're going to go. You don't have a customer forever. So the reality is we need to make sure that we keep hold of them as long as possible, and we maximize the opportunity in a positive, mutually beneficial way with that client over an extended period. You can only, you can be a contingent recruiter all day long, but the reality is you'll be working quite often in a competitive environment. And what differentiates you? What makes you any different? And people always say, "Oh, our service is great," but everybody says that, don't they? So for me, you know, what's RPO all about? RPO, if you do it well and do it right, it will mean you can get into clients that maybe you couldn't get into without that solution. So you can use it from an offensive, there's an American term for you, an offensive sort of perspective, you know, because if you've got your competitors really, really close to a client that you want to get into, well, unless you're going to go with something different, or, you know, drop your trousers on price, which nobody wants to go down that race to the bottom route on cost. Well, let's go with something different, innovative, exciting. So it can be used from an offensive perspective as well. But for me, it's all about protecting our customers, keeping the wolf from the door, keeping the competition at bay. You know, so we want to have something that's contracted, something where, you know, we can add a lot more value, where we can actually have an impact for the customer beyond putting a bum on a seat, but actually hit some of their pain points, you know, in terms of cost per hire, time to hire, quality of hire. Talk about, you know, retention levels, maybe, you know, diversity. You know, the DEI piece is really important and critical, and there's something on a cultural level. So, you know, RPO isn't about being a bloody good recruiter and basically getting a client tied into an agreement. RPO is much more expansive than that, you know, and it should really get you engaged at a very, very different level with customers. So the business tends to be stickier, you know, and the contract's longer and binding. The revenue, it's all about recurring revenue, isn't it? You know, this horrible thing of contingent, we never quite know. You know, we can have those amazing lucky, you know, not lucky, we make our own luck, you know, much of the time, but you have those amazing sort of periods where everything just goes in, every deal that you touch in 1 month or 1 quarter happens and you knock it out of the park. But you can have the adverse, can't you, with contingent, where you do the perfect job. And I say this to recruitment businesses all the time. You can do the best possible job you can do, the most amazing job, and be perfect, but still fail, because we're dealing with people and unknown quantities within people, you know, and therefore having something that's professional, that's contractually binding, where you're adding real value, delivering a solution, you know, you get that stickiness, you get that engagement, you can keep the competition at bay, not forever, you know, and an RPO doesn't go on for 25, 30, 40 years. The reality is at some point that relationship's going to stop, but when it does stop, it will stop in a positive way, and you'll actually sit back and reflect and say, yeah, we've done really well for ourselves from a professional point of view with that client, but also financially we've done well as well. And that probably leads on to the most important point for me, you know, because, you know, when is a 20% fee not a 20% fee? Well, when we're doing it on a contingent basis, because when everybody says, what's your average fee? And they, oh, it's 20%. Well, yeah, but that's only the stuff that you've converted. You start factoring all the stuff you haven't converted, you know, and I don't know how it compares to the US, but, you know, bloody good contingent recruiter in the UK will fill 1 in 2 vacancies. So that 20% fee, in my mind, for all the work and effort we've put in on 2 jobs, that 20% is covering 2 jobs. It's 10%. Mm-hmm. If you do it that way, if you're filling 1 in 4, shit, man, it's 5%. You know, and what other business do we want a model where, you know, if you were producing cars, you know, and every 2 out of every 3 cars that came off the end you had to put in the crusher because they weren't fit for purpose, you wouldn't have a business. But that's how we run a lot of recruitment businesses, certainly in the UK. You know, no placement, no fee, and we're running at 1 million miles an hour, and you know, it's fraught and it's frantic, and an RPO solution is so radically different to all of that. It provides a brilliant environment for an agency to grow, more profitability going down to the bottom line, better culture for people to work in. You know, there's a lot of people in the UK, because we went on a big uptick after COVID. You know, organizations were hiring for fun. All of a sudden, everybody was saying in the UK, 360 recruiters are dead. We just need these big delivery teams. Well, yeah, that's great in a really buoyant market, but as it collapsed in on itself 18 months ago, and all of a sudden there's loads of people that actually are frantically trying to be retrained now into how to actually hunt as well as farm. But if you've got an RPO in your organization, you'll ride out those peaks and troughs. It won't take it away fully, but it will give you a smoother line, and it will provide an environment where people who are brilliant at the talent work, working with the candidates, doing that resourcing, researching, managing process, they can excel. around an RPO model, and quite often what we see in a lot of recruitment businesses in the UK, particularly some of the SME ones, is they have people doing things that part of their job they're not really that comfortable at doing. They don't really want to do it, So there's lots of good reasons. Hopefully that all sort of makes sense and resonates.
You made a great case, Miles, for RPO or all but. And before I ask you the next question, Paul, anything that Miles missed that you want to add to why do we want to do RPO?
Yeah, no, I think Miles has covered it all there. I think the main thing for me is, being a recruitment agency owner is super stressful. And you may not be wanting to sell your business, you may just be wanting it to be more sustainable. And this is a great way to do it. But when we talk to business owners, the two things they really pull out is that suddenly they're having conversations with their customers that they would never ever have conversations about. They find it much more meaningful work, much more rewarding. And the people that work for these business owners, suddenly there's more career opportunities. They don't have to do, resourcing. They don't just have to do selling. There's this bit in the middle where you can actually be a resource business partner. And it just changes the dynamics of organizations. If you can do, you only have to get one in your business and then the rest will cascade. But getting that one in your business is so important. But once you've done it once, dead easy.
Talking about doing it once. So now that we bought into the RPO model, Miles, how do we start? How do we do it?
Oh,
Look,
sorry, I'll jump in there because I think it's so in terms of where you start, it's all about the segmenting your customer base. And whatever you do in recruitment, whether you build an RPO solution or you just run a recruitment business, we always start off looking at the existing customer base. Miles mentioned about customer retention and losing customers. The average retention rate in the industry is 50%. So, for every two customers, you're going to lose one every year. So looking at your customer base is the first thing we do. Miles and I, we go back 3 years and we pull all the customer data for the last 3 years and we look at what's happened to those customers and we map people's customer retention rates. But I'm going to quote your stat here. 27% of recruitment agency owners do not measure client retention. That is shocking. That's not far off a third. So, if you haven't got client retention on your monthly board metrics, I'd encourage everybody to relook at that because you absolutely should do. If you think about McKinsey always say that selling to an existing customer is between 70% and 85% more easier than selling to a cold one. So we always start looking at the client base. And Miles and I, we've got a customer segmentation exercise. I'll share briefly the formula for doing that. You get all your customers going back last 3 years. You segment it into contract and perm, and you look at what you've had from that customer based around exclusivity, the higher the fees, access to line managers, repeat roles, and you put your customer name on a post-it note. And depending upon whether you get 5 out of those 5 criteria or you get 1, you put it on a different post-it note and you put all the post-it notes on the wall, and that's your customers very basically segmented into what you get from your customer. The second thing you do is look at the customer relationship map. So you have contact, acceptance, trust, loyalty, and advocacy. Once you've got those headings and you understand what the definition of each relationship is, then you put the post-it notes in each one of those channels. And it's really interesting starting to segment your customer base by doing that. And the last thing you do is look at where the customer is going. So this is using the Boston Matrix. We create swim lanes. So you've got this big matrix on a wall. You've got the different colored post-it notes. You've got channels based around the customer relationship and where you're at. And then you've got your swim lanes in terms of the Boston Matrix and where the customer's going. And you end up with a big grid on a wall. And it's really interesting because if you haven't got a lot of customer relationships in that top upper quadrant based around what you're getting, your customer relationships and where the customer's going, the first thing you probably need to do is invest in your customer relationships. Don't do RPO because the chances of actually selling to customers is quite hard, especially when it's a brand new service line. Your brand won't be known for selling and providing RPO services and solutions. So the first thing you've got to do is just do a bit of a reality check and make sure you've got enough relationships in that top upper quadrant to go targeting, because that's where you're going to go first. And the second thing Miles and I do is, when we're looking at that customer relationship map on the wall, is just start to ask ourselves a question. If those are the top relationships, when did you last do a service review with that customer? Is it in the last 6 months, the last 12 months? Is it in the last 2 years? Because again, according to our data, and we've had over 100 people, 100 business owners complete our data and health check, 32% of agency owners haven't had a formal service review with their top 3 customers in the last 2 years. That's shocking. So this customer relationship map, whether you do RPO or not, that is something every agency owner should be all over every year. It's a great exercise to do with your team. It takes about a day to run that exercise. And it's the starting point, because if you've got enough customers in that top upper quadrant, you've got enough customers to start to have conversations with. But it's a scale of economies. If you're thin in that upper quadrant, the probability of converting something is substantially less. So for me, that's where every agency should start, but that should be an annual exercise. Miles, have I missed anything there?
No, I think that's all. It's all pretty cool.
Cool.
So, Paul, I have a couple of thoughts about what you just shared. One of them, I recently was listening to a podcast, and it was talking about the guests were from one of the big consulting companies, and at some point of their evolution, they went through a disruption where they were losing business for smaller business that they would not take to other competition, and they had to look into themselves and basically do what you suggested, ask their customers and look at how else they can serve them. This is where they found the opportunity. The other thing that you also mentioned with the customer segmentation, I would say that's one of the common stories I've heard through the years to how businesses get into RPO. Their customers, there's the opportunity, and their customers take them into that different business model, if you will, recruiting models. So thank you for bringing that up. So my question back to Paul is, other than customer segmentation, what should recruiting leaders consider or need to consider first, and why, before they get into RPO?
So then, once you've done your customer segmentation, gosh, it's about building out the service proposition, or the minimal viable product, as we call it. So once you've got your customer base, it's then starting to think about what your customers may value, things they may appreciate, things you've probably done in the past. Do you know, most recruiters have probably done elements of RPO. So if I talk about, has anybody ever mapped the market? A lot of recruiters will go, yep, I've done that. Well, that's one part of the service that you might put into your RPO proposition. If I say, have you done some salary benchmarking? A lot of people will say, yeah, I've done bits of that. So you start to look at the service proposition, and again, we put this into 5 channels. So you've got your strategy, you've got your attraction, you've got your sourcing, you've got your selection, and then you've got your onboarding. So start to break down in each one of those channels, what is it that you've done? What does the services look like? And what do you think your customer might value? Now, before anybody says anything, a recruitment agency is part of the sourcing channel, and an agency does that much of a process, which is that long. So we have to shift our mindsets from thinking, what do we want to provide as a recruiter, versus what the customer might value. And once you've broken that down, you've into those channels, and they aren't the only channels, by the way. Some people use different channels, but those are the ones that I use. Once you've done that and you've brainstormed what the services might look like, then you've then got something which resembles a service offering. Now, the danger here, and this is where most recruiters go wrong, is they assume that is what the customer wants. I am always pleasantly surprised that when I go and talk to a customer and say, this is the service proposition of an RPO, they will frequently say to me, I don't want that, or there's something missing here. So there is a missing gap here. And this plays into the Kano analysis, which Miles is going to talk about shortly. But just to raise a really valid point, I've sold RPO services very recently to the likes of Insight Investment, which most people will know is part of Bank of New York Mellon, to Collinson's, who do the airport lounges around the world. So those are some of the two well-known brands, but I could rattle off another 10 or 15. The one thing when you're starting off in selling RPO solutions, and I mentioned this earlier, your brand isn't known for selling RPO services. So this relationship piece and trying to think about what the customer would really value is really important, because you frequently get one chance to sell these, and if you get it wrong and miss the dartboard, you probably won't get a second chance. So the next piece for me is around the Kano analysis. And Miles is our Kano king, by the way. He knows Kano analysis inside out. So Miles, do you just want to talk about how we then take the MVP and run it through the Kano analysis and the why, and how we beta test it with customers?
I will, but can I go back just
Of
because
course,
it's just an important thing that I just want to talk about. And it's really important for the audience. It's absolutely critical, actually, to get this across. Wanting to do and deciding to do an RPO isn't an easy, simple decision. Yeah, this isn't dressing up recruitment in some emperor's new clothes, giving it a different name. And I think one of the things, and Paul, I know it will resonate with you, but one of the things that Paul and I have seen time and time and time again, people have approached us and said, yeah, we've got an RPO, but it's not working. Or we've done one a few years ago and we really want to start doing it. But when we sort of scratch at the surface, it's like, it wasn't an RPO. You're just recruiting. You're doing that narrow thing in the middle, and you've sort of maybe put a couple of bells and whistles on the outside, but it's not a proper RPO. So for me, going right back to the starting point, is we need to be really clear as an organization, right? Are we going to do talent-based solutions? Yes or no? If we are, is it permanent recruitment? Is it non-permanent recruitment? Is it both? Why do we want to do them? What part is this going to play in our journey as an organization? What proportion of our revenue do we expect to see as a result of having success? What does success look like? First 12 months, next 12 months, so on and so forth. Because the challenge is this won't be hugely expensive for any organization to do. The big cost, other than maybe, look, if people like us, we'd love to come in and work with organizations to help them on their journey. Other people are available as well as Northstar, which is particularly good at it. But the reality is it's time. Who's going to own this? Within the organization. This isn't a part-time job. So it's a long, elongated process. And I'll come on to sales later on, but this is a long burn sales process. We might get lucky, but it's long burn sales. So this is all about investment of time, energy, having focus, and actually saying, are we ready for this right now? It sounds really exciting. One of the things UK recruiters are really good at is getting excited and animated about shiny new thing. They're like magpies. Oh, something over there, let's go and have that. Something over there, let's go and have that. This will fail unless you give it absolute focus and attention. Done well and done right and being ready is important. And part of the journey that Paul and I do with organizations we talk with is we do an initial assessment. And there's been a number of organizations in the last 2 years that we've said, you're not quite ready to do this, guys. And these are the reasons why. And this is what you need to go and do. And then 3 months, 6 months, whatever. Yes, let's then have the conversation. But at the moment, you've just got stuff missing that isn't it means we're likely to not have the success that you want to have. So that's really important. But the time element, I can't stress more, on the ownership piece. This has to be driven from the top through an organization. So let's go back to what Paul was talking about. So we've created, as an organization, this wonderful minimal viable product. We've got all these bells and whistles, and we're really excited about it because, hey, we know best, don't we? So we know what everybody's gonna want and like. Well, fortunately, Japanese guy, can't remember his name, came up with Kano analysis, and Kano analysis is brilliant. I got coached into doing this many years ago, decades ago, in fact, and it was a real game changer for me, because what it allows us to do is take a virtual concept of a product, value proposition, whatever, go to our customers, and through the use of questioning, find out whether actually what we think is a good idea is actually a good idea for them. And but it does more than that, because what it does, it says, if we were to do it this way, what would you think? And if we didn't do that, how would that make you feel? And it actually allows us to then, you imagine you've got all of these elements of an RPO solution that you want to deploy, strategy, sourcing, attraction, selection, onboarding, yada, yada, yada. So you've built up this product virtually. We test every element of it. And what it actually does is it gets everybody to get involved. And clients love it, by the way. They really appreciate getting involved in this because it's about developing a solution with them, for them, maybe. But they'll give the feedback we get, basically allows us to say, right, this has to be in the product. But it's a given. So it's not going to excite people because they just expect it to be there. It's as simple as that. It's like having a car, it has to have windows. If it doesn't have windows, nobody's going to bloody buy it, are they? It's as simple as that. So it's a given. So the Kano analysis allows us to understand what the must-haves are, what the nice-to-haves are, what the exciters and delighters are. So the stuff that's going to make people sit up, they see it, online, or they read something, they're like, wow, I need this. I need to find out more. But what it also does is it actually throws out the stuff that's going to detract from the proposition. So when we've run this Kano analysis process with organizations on their virtual products, it's brilliant, because usually most organizations get it about 85% right, but there's little stuff in there that we've missed, or there's things that we didn't think important that actually are really critical. And occasionally there's also things that we've missed, because part of that Kano process gets clients say, is there anything else that you were thinking we should have been talking about and we're not? But one of the biggest pluses about this Kano analysis, time and again this happens, usually within that group you go to, because you'll take this and you'll engage known and friendly, warm clients with this. And we've had this in live situations where a customer's turned around to a client and said, we didn't realize you could do this. This is really interesting. When's this going to be ready? Because we want to talk to you about this. Actually, we're doing this, or we were looking at doing this, but now you've prompted us to move it forward. So it is a great way to actually start engaging with customers and lift yourselves out of that pit with the millions of others that just do all the same old stuff. It really, really is. So I can't advocate it enough, that Kano analysis. It's absolutely game changing, and it saves you so much time and money, because you don't want to take a product to market and get it wrong. It's a disaster.
Miles, just to add there, that when you've done that customer segmentation, we look at that upper quadrant, don't we, in terms of that's where you go for your Kano analysis. So that's the reason why there's got to be some critical mass there, because you would need, 20 to 30 customers ideally to be able to go out and have this conversation with.
It's like everything. You need a good sample size to be sure, 100%.
Yeah.
Well, that is terrific. I did not know about Kano analysis, and thank you for the enlightening. I have many notes and from the conversation. My next question is for Miles, and Paul, feel free to jump in. So now that you have built your services and tested it, refined it, talk us through the next step.
Okay, look, I mean, it's all about taking it to market. And this isn't just about having some slick marketing campaign and some nice imagery and some nice brand. You're going to have to go and have some meaningful conversations with some, probably maybe some different decision makers in organizations that you're working with. and some organizations maybe on this webinar will be familiar with structured sales methodologies or whatever, but you're going to have to winning ones and twos, winning contingent business is fairly straightforward and fairly easy. Solution sales, which is what this is about, this is a long burn. There's going to be multiple decision makers involved in a process. No organization is going to outsource a chunk of their process to an organization without multiple people being involved in it. You've got decision makers from a quality perspective, a people perspective, an operational perspective, certainly because the numbers that are going to be involved, a financial perspective, and Paul mentioned earlier, and he was really spot on with this. You've got to get your ducks lined up here and know when to take this to the client. So we really advocate a process of mapping customers out thoroughly, understanding what we've got but what we don't have, who the key critical decision makers are within the organization, and making sure that we're aware. We talked earlier about pain points. It's pain points and opportunities, because if we go and position something with an organization around a talent solution, are we going to push all the right buttons with the right people? There's no point in just getting one person on board and one person say, yeah, that's fantastic, that's brilliant, because I can guarantee there's 2 or 3 others who may even be more senior than that individual that we've got the relationship, that really are going to sign this thing off and get engaged. So we do quite a lot of coaching with organizations in terms of deploying a structured sales methodology to make sure that we get as much as we can together. So when we push that button and go to client A, B, or C with this opportunity, that it's the right opportunity at the right time, and we've basically done all of our homework sort of properly. Because the danger is, if you go with the perfect solution at the wrong time, it will fail. If you go with the perfect solution to the wrong person, or don't include the right people, it will fail. And once you've spoiled your pitch, you can't pick the phone up next week, like in the same way you would if you're looking for some fresh jobs to work on. That's sort of you done for a chunk of time. Credibility's gone a little bit. So getting that sales piece right, and understanding who are the right customers. Part of the work we do as well is we do work with understanding most valuable customer traits. So actually having a scoring matrix to saying, is this the right client for us? Are we the right organization for them? You've got to do as much as you can possibly do to mitigate all the risks to this failing, because you do really have one chance. But be prepared to be in it for the long haul. And we always say to organizations we work with, look, there might be some quick success, there might be some quick wins, and we'll celebrate those and we'll look for those. Of course we will, but be prepared not to win a significant piece of business in your first 12 months. And I know that's a horrible thing to say, and now I've switched everybody off because everybody thought this was going to be the thing that saves their organization or takes it to the stratospheric level. It will do, but be prepared that it might take a little bit of time, and it's not a quick fix for revenue or anything like that. But if you're in it, actually, this will be game changing over a 3-year cycle with an organization. Absolutely game changing.
Yeah. And I love that message. It's something we advocate at the RPO as well. RPO is not for everyone. You do have to have the right investment and intentionality to do that. Anything else, Paul, before we go into one of the common questions about RPO pricing?
No, I think we're okay to move on to that, if that's okay to you. I just go back for one point that Miles touched upon it a little bit, which is just that mindset shift. And if you think about RPO, the purpose of RPO is that you're representing the customer's best interests. So if you think of RPO as in you're driving candidates, and those candidates are going to go in your CRM, that is not RPO. That's just a polished recruitment service. So the whole purpose of an RPO is actually you're driving agency usage down, and you are driving internal mobility, referrals, and direct hires in that order up. So this mindset shift, I think, is really super important because when we come onto the pricing, if you haven't got this in your head, you start to revert back to being a recruiter, and I've definitely been guilty of this in my past experience. And then you get frustrated because you're pitching something and they don't want to buy it, and you go, well, why do you not want to buy it? It's because you haven't got your mindset in the right place. Miles mentioned earlier, we worked with a business owner. He'd made a pitch for RPO, and the HR director had rejected it, and he couldn't understand why. And when we started to just break it down and get under the skin of it, it's just he was thinking about this from a recruitment perspective, not from a organizational perspective. So again, just to reiterate, your purpose here as an RPO provider is to reduce agency usage through driving internal mobility, referrals, and direct hires. And this is how the big providers, this is how they make it stack up from a cost perspective, is they go attacking that supply chain quite aggressively.
It's like Miles said earlier, there's different stakeholders in this RPO business and selling RPO solutions. So let's get into pricing. This is one of the common questions about when you start an RPO. How do you price RPO? Because it's different than contingency.
Well, I'll tell you what I reckon about 85% of business owners do. They'll say they're charging. In the UK, it might be 20%. In the US, it might be 40%. And then they'll say, well, I'm getting exclusivity now and it's an RPO deal. So I'll knock off a couple of percentage points and give them a bit of a discount. That is absolutely the wrong way to do it. And I'll tell you the reason why. If you've had the proper meaningful conversation with your customer, you will have been engaging in and debating data. So the baseline data is really important. So understanding what the customer hires for, the levels of roles, the salaries associated with those roles. You can group them, by the way, into either job titles or grades or positions. Understanding how many roles they fill through internal mobility, referrals, direct hire, and agency. Those 4 channels is really important. And I'll tell you the reason why. Doing this baseline data, and we call it a discovery audit, so going in and understanding exactly what the landscape looks like and understanding where the hotspots are, where the bottlenecks are, where the opportunities are, where you can re-engineer the processes, how you get data from one place to another. Have they got any technology in there? Do they need some technology? How much do they spend on marketing? How much do they spend on LinkedIn or job boards? All these questions are really important for 2 reasons. In the pricing, there's 2 purposes. First purpose, by asking the right questions, is to help the customer build the business case. If you build the business case for the customer, when it does go to the finance stakeholder, you're going to be on the front foot. Now, it's not to say they might not challenge it, because finance people are normally pretty rigorous with the numbers, right? But if you've built the business case, you're on the front foot. The second thing is that if you've done that, you've asked all the questions, you've got all the baseline data, you understand what the service looks like, you understand how many people you need, how much involvement of the business owner, how many resources are needed for that account, how many resource business partners. Once you've done all that, you can work out the cost of delivering. So we're doing this bottom up. You'll then get a cost of delivery, and then you can put your gross margin on top. And the reason we do it that way is because if you follow that methodology, all that gross margin is going to drop to the bottom line. So in Europe, agencies convert around 15% of their gross margin or net fee income to their bottom line. By doing it in this way, you should be doubling the amount of gross margin you drop into the profit line. So this is all about doubling the profitability of the revenue that you are making through RPO by pricing this from the bottom up, right down to making sure you've included any implementation fees or any legal contracts that may need to be drawn up. So once you've got the granularity, you've got the baseline data, you understand what you're doing, you price it from the bottom up, put your margin on top, and make sure it's a healthy margin, because most agencies will be looking for somewhere between 35 and 50% gross margin. And that's the amount you'll be converting to the bottom line. So it's a great way to make more money if you're doing it the right way around.
Well, I need to ask one question about technology, and then we'll take audience questions because we are coming at the end of the hour. RPO is about people, process, technology. So tell us, what do business owners need to know about the technology aspect for an RPO business?
Miles, do you want to pick that one up?
Yeah, I will do. And please feel free to come in at the back end if there's anything I miss. Look, tech is going to be really important here. As I said earlier, this isn't about recruiting in a different way. We're going to need something that sits right in the middle of everything. So there's visibility and transparency, so we can see the flow. We're getting the data out of there. We can see where the bottlenecks are, so on and so forth. I think one of the most important things, though, about tech, we're not, and again, this I can only speak from UK perspective and what we've seen. Quite often, some of these agencies that have said they're doing an RPO, we sort of talk about, well, what technology you're using. Oh, we're using our CRM, but that's a CRM. It needs to be an applicant tracking system, and it's your CRM in your business. Well, I don't know many organizations that are going to be too happy about that, because they're paying you a lot of money and everything's sitting with you. All the talent pools are sitting with you. Well, how's that an RPO? So, getting the tech right is really important. And you're going to, whether it's a MSP or an RPO, it's going to be different tech, yes, but it's where it sits, where it gets deployed, who owns it. Because, at the end of any journey, and we want to have success, but over time, client might change their mind. They may decide they want to insource rather than outsource. It's really important that, that tech is in the right place. But the criticality of it is the tech's there to help everybody be successful. It's to make sure that the relevant parties within all organizations have sight of everything. And particularly if you've got a second tier supply chain, with Paul talked rightfully, this is about getting it right from a direct hire point of view, from an internal mobility point of view, including referrals internally as well. But the reality is we can't be successful all the time on those routes, and we may need agencies to come in at the bottom end of this and feed through. So you're going to need to get the right piece of tech in place. The great news is nowadays, if this was a number of years ago, very expensive, difficult to sort of implement, just a bloody nightmare. Now there's some great tech out there that's software as a service. So you're not having to go and invest in huge amounts of tech. It's not going to be cumbersome. It's not going to be difficult. There's a lot of good providers out there with talent tech that you can really plug and play, and clients are going to love, and it can tie into their careers pages, manage that as a channel as well in through the ATS. So tech's everything. If you haven't got the right tech, forget it. It ain't happening.
All right, so let's take audience question. I'm going to combine two of the questions for the sake of time. And this is for both of you, Miles and Paul. What would be your advice to an agency owner thinking of building an RPO or selling RPO solution? And how do you pitch an RPO solution?
So I'll pick up the minimum size. Maybe Miles, you can pick up the pitch. So minimum size is a really hard one, right? Because if you're recruiting 10 data scientists, that's going to take you a while, as opposed to doing 10 Java developers. So the complexity of the skills that you're recruiting for is a really key dimension. And this plays into the part of how many roles somebody would typically manage. But as a very, very rough rule of thumb, if I was pressed, you need to be able to assign a full-time member of staff where possible to a client for an RPO. Otherwise, it starts to get complex in terms of tracking time and making sure you're making money out of these things. So we've just done work with a company, and it's publicized because they published it on their website. We don't normally share agency names, by the way, but a company out in Ireland called FRS. They have announced that they have converted their first RPO customer. And we're looking around sort of 40 hires per year. But again, it's the complexity of the roles that is important, not just the volume. But around 40 is probably for me about the minimum. What you don't want to be going is too large, and this is where your Alexander Mann, Korn Ferries, CLOs, Manpower, Decos, the big end of the market is saturated. You're into third, fourth, fifth generation in some cases. They are starting to come down in terms of hunting ground. And that small medium enterprise market is under attack, is probably going to become under attack a little bit. So if you ever end up in a room where you're competing with an Alexander Mann as a small medium enterprise agency, you're probably in the wrong room. I've competed once against Cielo and won, I hasten to add. But had I have ever gone up against, an Alexander Mann and a Korn Ferry, I'm sure I would have lost. So it's just making sure you pick your battles and you do that customer segmentation really well to understand where to go pitching and where to go hunting.
Cool. Let me just talk really quickly. I'm very mindful of time as well. So let's talk about the pitching thing. Look, this is all about picking your battles and picking your fights, to win this war. And, we need to be really smart and clever about that. The reality is there are probably 30, 40 different triggers that would be a pain point or an opportunity that we need to understand and then use that as part of the reason why we're going to talk to a client about something. The main ones, we talked about them earlier. They always want it cheaper, they want it quicker, and they want it better, usually the quality of the candidate being better. We've got those three. We've talked about managing process, transparency, visibility, more efficient, more effective processes. We talked earlier about the retention side of things, so they're keeping hold of people for longer by getting the right people. And also as well, the cultural sort of aspect, so there's a lot of things. But in terms of where do we pitch, to answer that question, well, you pitch once you've got that understanding from the client about where their challenges are, where their issues are, their problems, the opportunities that they're missing. So there's no one size fits all, that's how we go and sell it. It's all about engaging with a client, talking to them about talent, what they're doing well, what they're not doing so well, what success looks like for them, what their plans are now in the future. And we create something bespoke for that.
I'll just share one little snippet that I used to do. Is I used to share market insights with customers. So I'd never say, can I come and talk to you about RPO? I'd say, can I come and talk to the leadership team about market trends, thought leadership, data points, things you should be aware of, some competitor analysis. I'll do some benchmarking for you. And I'd frequently turn up, usually into the HR and people teams initially, and I'd present some data. This data is freely available. Manpower produced some brilliant data. Alexander Mann, some brilliant data. The Staffing Industry Analyst, fantastic data. Gartner, McKinsey. There's all these data sources available. Sometimes it's just about pulling it all together, getting the bits that are relevant for those customers, and going and talking the customers through those data points. They will love it for sure.
Hey, Paul, I need to throw the RPOA hat in the ring.
And the RPOA as well.
We are about to publish our third annual RPO Trends Report. It is full of tons of data, and I highly recommend you keep an eye.